"You're selfish!" my mother screamed across the hospital waiting room. Every head turned toward me. My brother wouldn't even look me in the eyes. 5 minutes earlier, I'd said one word I'd never said to my parents before. No. I had spent my entire life saying yes. To babysitting, to loans, to fixing problems that weren't mine. But that day, I finally said no. My name is Claire Donnelly. I'm 38 years old. And this is how my family learned I wasn't their emergency fund anymore. If you want to understand how I became the daughter everyone expected to rescue the family, we have to go back. I was 9 years old the first time I noticed the difference, though I wouldn't have had the words for it then. It was Christmas morning, and my little brother Jason, 6 years old, tore open a box containing the exact gaming console he'd circled in a catalog 3 separate times. My parents had waited in line at 3 different stores to find one in stock. I remember my father's face when Jason opened it. Pure, uncomplicated joy, the kind you save for the people you love most in the world. I opened my own present a few minutes later. A second-hand bicycle, spray-painted to look newer than it was. A small dent in the fender that no amount of paint could hide. "We got a great deal on it," my mother said, watching my face carefully. "It rides just as well as a new one, sweetheart. You'll see." "I love it," I told her, and I meant it mostly because I was 9, and wanted her to smile at me the way she'd just smiled at Jason. She did smile, but it wasn't the same smile. Jason's 7th birthday party had a rented bounce house, a magician, and a cake shaped like a dinosaur that took our mother 3 phone calls to a specialty bakery to arrange. My 10th birthday, 2 months earlier, had been a sheet cake from the grocery store and 4 friends from my class, which was lovely, and which I'd been genuinely happy with, until I overheard my mother on the phone with my aunt the week before Jason's party. "We really want to do something special for him this year," she said, phone cord stretched around the kitchen doorway. "He's been having a hard time making friends at school. I think it'll help his confidence." I couldn't hear my aunt's reply, but my mother laughed, a light, easy laugh, at whatever she'd said. "Oh, Claire's never needed help with things like that," my mother said. "She's always just handled herself. Jason needs a little more than she does." I stood in the hallway holding a stack of folded laundry I'd volunteered to put away, and I remember thinking, with the strange clarity children sometimes have about things they can't fully explain yet, that being fine on my own had somehow become the reason I got less, instead of a reason I might occasionally get more. By the time I was 12, the pattern had a shape, even if none of us had named it yet. "Claire, can you watch Jason after school today?" my mother asked one Tuesday, keys already in her hand, already halfway out the door to her shift at the dental office. "I have a book report due tomorrow," I said. "You're so much better at managing your time than I am," she said, kissing the top of my head. "You'll figure it out. You always do." I did figure it out. I finished the book report at 11 that night, after Jason was finally asleep, after I'd made him dinner, after I'd talked him down from a meltdown about a video game he couldn't beat. I got an A on the report. Nobody asked how. The dentist recommended braces for both of us the same year, when I was 13 and Jason was 10. My bite crowded on one side, his front teeth slightly overlapping. "We can really only manage one set right now," my mother told me, sitting on the edge of my bed that night. "Yours are more of a cosmetic thing," the dentist said. "Jason's could actually cause him problems chewing down the road if we wait." I found out 4 years later, going through old paperwork while helping my mother clean out a filing cabinet, that the dentist's notes on my own crowding had used the word moderate, the same word used in Jason's file. Neither case had been urgent. Someone had simply decided, at some point in that conversation, which one of us the word moderate applied to more gently. I never mentioned it. By then, my teeth had settled into whatever shape they were going to settle into, and pointing out a 4-year-old decision felt, somehow, smaller than it deserved to feel. "Dad, can I get a car when I turn 16? I asked at the dinner table when I was 14. watching my father cut his chicken with the same careful precision he brought to everything. "Money's tight right now, Claire Bear," he said, not looking up. "You're resourceful, though. You'll find a way." 2 years later, when Jason turned 16, my father handed him the keys to a used Honda Civic in the driveway, freshly detailed, a bow on the antenna. "We found a good deal," my mother explained, when she caught me staring out the kitchen window. "I got a job instead," I said. "At the pharmacy. I've been saving for 8 months. See?" she said, brightening, like I'd just proven her point instead of contradicting it. "You didn't even need help. You're just built differently than your brother, honey. Stronger." I didn't say anything else. I went to work that Saturday, the way I had every Saturday for 8 months, and I didn't mention the Civic again. The spring of my junior year, my French class organized a 2-week trip to Paris, $600 per student, a fundraising packet included to help offset the cost. "I really want to go," I told my parents at dinner, sliding the packet across the table. "I can fundraise part of it. I just need help with the rest." My father studied the packet for a long moment. "That's a lot of money for 2 weeks, Claire Bear. I don't think we can swing it this year." 3 weeks later, Jason came home with a permission slip for a travel baseball team that required a $2,000 registration fee, plus travel costs for a summer season. "Of course we'll figure that out," my mother said, signing it at the kitchen counter without hesitation. This could really be something for him. Coach says he's got real talent. I didn't go to Paris. I fundraised $300 selling wrapping paper door to door, and when it became clear the rest wasn't coming, I quietly told my French teacher I'd changed my mind, that I didn't think it was the right year for me. She looked at me for a long moment, like she understood exactly what I wasn't saying and didn't push. By senior year, I was working 16 hours a week at a grocery store on top of a full course load and an AP schedule heavy enough that my guidance counselor asked, more than once, if I was sure I wasn't overextending myself. "I like being busy," I told her, which was half true. The fuller truth was that being busy left less time to notice what wasn't being offered to me at home. I remember one Friday night that year, closing register 3 at 11 o'clock, exhausted. A chemistry test waiting for me the next morning that I hadn't finished studying for, when my manager, a kind woman named Doreen, who'd watched me work every weekend for 2 years, stopped me on my way out. "You know you don't have to prove anything to anybody working this hard," she said, not unkindly. "Whatever's making you push yourself like this, I hope somebody notices it eventually." I didn't have an answer for her. I just thanked her and drove home, and stayed up until 1 in the morning finishing my chemistry review, and got an A on the test the next day that nobody at home asked about, because Jason had a basketball game that same evening that took up the whole dinner conversation instead. College applications arrived the same year Jason failed algebra twice. My parents sat with him at the kitchen table 3 nights a week that spring, a tutor hired specifically to help him pass. Patient explanations of quadratic equations drifting up the stairs while I studied alone in my room for the SAT. I got into the state university with a partial academic scholarship. My parents took me out to dinner to celebrate. Applebee's my choice, because I liked their potato skins and because I understood by then not to ask for anything more expensive. "We're so proud of you," my father said, raising his soda in a toast. "You've always been able to handle things on your own." "The scholarship only covers about half," I said. "I'll need help with the rest." My parents exchanged a look I would learn to recognize over the following 20 years. A specific silent negotiation that always seemed to end the same way. "We'll figure something out," my mother said, which turned out to mean, "You'll figure something out." Jason started at the same university 2 years later, and my parents drove him up with a car full of new furniture for his dorm room. A mini fridge, a nice desk lamp, an area rug, all of it purchased over a single weekend at a home goods store. "We didn't want him feeling like he was missing out on the full experience," my mother told me, when I mentioned carefully that my own dorm room had been furnished entirely with items from a campus donation closet. You never seem to mind roughing it a little. Jason's a bit more sensitive about things like that. I let it go, the way I let most things go that year, because pointing it out never seemed to change anything except how the rest of the conversation felt. I took out loans. I worked at the campus bookstore 20 hours a week. 4 years later, I called home to talk through graduation logistics, and my mother's voice had the particular hesitation I'd learned to recognize as bad news, wrapped in careful phrasing. "Sweetheart, we need to talk about the timing," she said. "Jason's regional tournament got moved to that same weekend. It's his last year of eligibility. Coach thinks scouts might actually be there." "My graduation is that Saturday, Mom. I already told you the date months ago." "I know, honey, and we feel terrible about it. But this could be Jason's one real shot at something. You understand, don't you? You've never needed us there the way he does." I graduated that Saturday with $26,000 in debt and an empty row of seats where my family should have been. And when I called that evening to tell them how it went, my mother answered from a bleacher, Jason's name being announced over a loudspeaker in the background. "We'll celebrate properly when we're all together," she said. "I promise." We never did. I did understand. That was the problem. I always understood. Jason dropped out of community college during his second semester. "It's just not for me right now," he told our parents over dinner, 22 years old, still living at home, still working part-time at a sporting goods store. "I think I want to try something in sales. Maybe start my own thing eventually." "Whatever makes you happy," my mother said, reaching over to squeeze his hand. "You'll find your path. Some people just need more time." Jason moved into an apartment with 2 friends from the sporting goods store a few months later, and I found out about it the way I found out about most things. Secondhand, at a family dinner, my mother mentioning it while passing the potatoes. "We covered his half of the deposit," she said. $1,200. It'll be good for him, having his own space, learning some independence." "Independence usually means covering your own deposit," I said, half joking, though I don't think either of us fully heard it as a joke. "Don't be like that, Claire," my mother said. "You've never needed help with things like that. Jason's still finding steady footing." I was 25 that year, 3 years into my first marketing job, living in a studio apartment I could barely afford, still paying $400 a month toward student loans. I came home for Sunday dinner and found Jason in the driveway showing our father a food truck he'd apparently just bought. "You bought a food truck?" I asked, standing on the porch, watching my father run his hand along the side panel like he was inspecting a classic car. "Dad and Mom helped me get the loan," Jason said. "It's an investment, gourmet grilled cheese. There's nothing like it in this town." I found my mother in the kitchen. "How much did you put toward that?" $11,000, she said, not looking up from the salad she was tossing. "Your father co-signed. It'll be good for him, Claire. He needs a project. He needs to believe in something." "I'm still paying off my student loans," I said. "I could use $11,000 too." My mother finally looked at me. "It's not a competition, sweetheart." "I never said it was," I said. "I just said I could use it too." She didn't have an answer for that. She went back to the salad, and I went back to my studio apartment, and the food truck folded 8 months later, the loan quietly absorbed into my parents' finances the way most of Jason's projects eventually were. A year after that, my car's transmission failed on the interstate during a snowstorm, a repair that came to just under $2,000, money I didn't have sitting around after a slow month at work. I called my parents carefully and asked if they could help, just until my next paycheck cleared. "You'll be okay," my mother said, in a tone that wasn't unkind, just certain, the same certainty she'd used my entire life. "You always figure these things out, Claire. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." "I'm not asking because I can't eventually figure it out," I said. "I'm asking because right now, this week, I actually can't afford it. Jason needs us more right now," she said gently, like the sentence should have been self-evident. "He's between things again. I just don't have it to spread around this month." I put the repair on a credit card I carried a balance on for the next 8 months. I didn't ask again. Some part of me had finally learned, that particular week, exactly which sentences my mother kept in reserve for exactly which child. I found out about the credit card at Thanksgiving that same year, 2 glasses of wine into the evening, when my mother mentioned it offhand to my aunt, not realizing I was close enough to hear. Jason had racked up almost $7,000 on one of his cards, she said, shaking her head fondly, like she was describing an endearing childhood habit instead of a number that size. We paid it down for him, didn't want it following him around when he's just getting started in life. I sat very still at that table, doing math I didn't want to be doing, arriving at a number that didn't match anything I'd ever been told. $7,000, quietly absorbed, the same autumn I'd carried a balance on my own card for a $2,000 transmission repair because there hadn't been anything left over to spread around. I didn't say anything that night. I told myself Thanksgiving wasn't for accounting, that I'd bring it up some calmer day that never quite arrived, the same way I'd told myself that once before, years earlier, about a tuition gap I'd learned about the exact same way. I met Marcus at 27. He came to a Sunday dinner at my parents' house about 4 months into dating, and in the car afterward, he was quiet for longer than usual. "Can I ask you something?" he finally said, pulling out of the driveway. "Your dad mentioned he just covered a car repair for Jason. Like, in passing, no big deal. And then 10 minutes later, your mom asked if you could look at their internet bill because it seemed high, and you just got up and did it, right there at the table." "That's just how we are," I said. "I'm good with that stuff. Jason's not." "Right. But nobody asked Jason to be good with anything tonight," Marcus said. "They asked him nothing and gave him money. They asked you for something and got your time for free on the spot. I'm not trying to start anything. I just want to make sure you've noticed it, because it seemed like nobody at that table had, including you. I told him he was reading too much into one dinner. It would take me over a decade and a hospital waiting room to admit how right he'd been. I married him at 29 in a backyard ceremony we paid for entirely ourselves. 40 guests, a rented tent, a friend's cousin as the officiant. Total cost just under $7,000. "Your parents didn't offer to help with any of it," Marcus asked me once, a few months before the wedding, going through our budget spreadsheet at our kitchen table. "They offered to pay for the cake," I said. "I told them not to worry about it." "Why?" "Because I've never asked them for anything as an adult, and I didn't want to start with my own wedding," I said. "It felt like it would come with strings I didn't want." Marcus set down his pen. "Claire, that's not a normal thing to say about your parents helping pay for your wedding." "Maybe not," I said. "But it's true." Jason met Brianna when he was 31, and something in him seemed to settle for the first time in his life. She was a hospice nurse, steady and warm, and she made him laugh in a way that felt different from the easy, careless laugh he'd always had. Something calmer underneath it. They got engaged 2 years later at a lake house Brianna's family owned. Jason called me the same night, crying happy tears. "I really think this is it, Claire," he said. "I finally found someone who makes me want to actually build something." "I'm so happy for you," I told him, and I meant every word of it. My parents' reaction, over the following weeks, told me everything about what was coming. "We want to give them the wedding of their dreams," my mother announced at Sunday dinner, practically glowing. "Your father's already looked into refinancing the house for the extra cushion. We've never had a chance to really celebrate like this." I set down my fork. "You're refinancing the house?" "Just partially," my father said. "It's Jason's wedding, Claire. You only get one of these." "I only got one wedding too," I said quietly. The table went silent for a moment. My mother reached over and patted my hand. "That was different, honey. You and Marcus wanted something simple. This is what Jason and Brianna want. We're just supporting that." I didn't say anything else. I ate my dinner, and I drove home, and I told Marcus about it in the car, and he didn't say anything either, just reached over and held my hand the rest of the way home. About 3 months before the wedding, my mother called and asked, almost breezily, if Marcus and I could cover the deposit for the string lights, just under $2,000. Until things settle down on our end, we're a little tight this month with the venue deposit. Of course, I said, before I'd even finished processing the ask. I mentioned it to Marcus that night, expecting him to shrug it off. Did they ever pay you back for the $11,000 toward the food truck? He asked instead. That was different. That was between them and Jason. Was it, though? You never asked for help with your own loans instead, and they never offered. Now they're asking you to cover part of a wedding you're not even the one getting married in. I sent the deposit money anyway, the next morning, and told myself it wasn't the same as before, because at least this time I'd noticed the pattern while I was standing inside it. Noticing a pattern and interrupting one, I would eventually learn, are two very different skills, and I'd only ever practiced the first. The wedding cost $68,000, a number I only learned in full because my mother, 3 glasses of wine deep at the rehearsal dinner, mentioned it to a cousin within my hearing. I found her alone in the hallway outside the restaurant bathroom a few minutes later, reapplying lipstick with a hand that wasn't quite steady. Are you okay? I asked. I'm fine, I'm just... She capped the lipstick, looked at herself in the small hallway mirror instead of at me. It's a lot of money, Claire. I know that. Your father keeps saying it'll be fine, that we'll figure it out same as we always do, but I lie awake some nights doing math I don't like the answer to. Then why not scale it back? I asked. It's not too late, because Jason's waited his whole life to feel like the center of something good, she said. I couldn't be the one to take that away from him, not when we finally had the chance to give it to him properly. She met my eyes in the mirror. I know how that sounds, next to everything else. I do know, Claire. I just don't know how to stop once we've started. I didn't have an answer for her. I hugged her instead, and she held on a beat longer than usual. And neither of us mentioned it again until the bill from my father's surgery arrived 4 months later, and the math she'd been avoiding finally came due for all of us at once. I stood in the back of the reception hall the night of the wedding, watching my parents dance with Jason and Brianna under a canopy of string lights that alone had apparently cost $4,000, and I gave a toast that made half the room cry. Jason has always been the most hopeful person I know, I said, raising my glass. He believes good things are coming, even when the evidence says otherwise. I used to think that made him naive. Now I think it just makes him brave in a way I've never quite managed to be. Brianna, thank you for loving my brother exactly the way he needed to be loved. Jason hugged me afterward, holding on a beat longer than usual. Thank you for that, he said. You've always been in my corner. You deserve it, I told him. And in that moment, surrounded by string lights and the smell of an obscenely expensive floral arrangement, I believed it completely. In his own toast, Jason thanked our parents at length. He thanked Brianna's parents. He thanked 6 different friends by name for helping plan the bachelor party. He didn't mention me once. I don't think it was cruelty. I don't think it even occurred to him that I belonged on that list. Somewhere along the way, I had become a fixture in our family instead of a person who might also need thanking. Load-bearing, invisible, like plumbing nobody thinks about until it breaks. 4 months after the wedding, my father collapsed at the hardware store where he'd worked for 20 years. Marcus and I drove to the hospital so fast I don't remember most of the drive, just the specific white-knuckle grip of my hands on the wheel and the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. My mother was already in the waiting room when we arrived, still wearing her cardigan from work, twisting a tissue in her hands until it had disintegrated into small white pieces on her lap. They said it's his heart, she said. They're taking him in for surgery, a blockage. They said if we'd waited another day. She couldn't finish the sentence. I sat down next to her and put my arm around her, and we waited together, the 2 of us, for almost 5 hours while surgeons did work. Neither of us fully understood to keep my father's heart doing its job. Jason arrived an hour after we did, Brianna trailing behind him, both of them pale and frightened. Is he going to be okay? Jason asked, dropping into the chair across from us. "We don't know yet," I said. "We just have to wait." He cried, quietly, and I reached over and squeezed his hand, because whatever complicated math existed between my brother and me, none of it mattered in that room. He was just my little brother, terrified, the same as I was. A surgeon in scrubs finally emerged just before 2 a.m, pulling off his surgical cap, and all 4 of us stood up at once. "He came through it," the surgeon said. "It was close. A coronary blockage requiring an emergency triple bypass. We had to bring in a specialist from outside your usual network for the procedure, since our on-call cardiac surgeon was already in another operation. But your father's stable. He's going to need a real recovery, but he's going to be okay." My mother made a sound I'd never heard her make before, somewhere between a sob and a laugh, and grabbed my arm to steady herself. "Can we see him?" she asked. "In about an hour, once he's settled in recovery," the surgeon said. "He did well. You should all be very relieved." We all cried in that hallway together, relief flooding through all of us at once. For one night, none of the old patterns mattered. We were just a family who had almost lost someone, and hadn't. The bill arrived 6 weeks later. Insurance covered a significant portion, but the out-of-network specialist fee, combined with the extended ICU stay, left a balance of $34,000. My parents called a family meeting, the 4 of us, plus Marcus, sitting around the same kitchen table where so many quiet financial decisions had shaped my entire life without my ever agreeing to the terms. "We just don't have this kind of money," my father said, still moving carefully, still recovering, a folder of hospital paperwork in front of him. "The refinance for the wedding used up more of our cushion than we planned for." I looked at Jason. He was staring at his own hands. "What are you thinking?" I asked, though some part of me already knew. "We were hoping," my mother said, "that between you and Jason, maybe you could help us figure this out." "Jason, can you and Brianna help with anything?" I asked directly. Jason shifted in his seat. "We just bought our house, Claire. We're pretty stretched right now, with the new mortgage." Nobody asked how they'd afforded a house 8 months after a $68,000 wedding. My mother turned to me instead, and I felt the weight of the entire conversation shift onto my side of the table, the way it always had, without a single person acknowledging that it had shifted at all. "Claire," my mother said, "you and Marcus are more stable. We were hoping you could help more." "Let me think about it," I said, which is what I always said, because 29 years of habit doesn't unlearn itself in a single sentence. I drove home that night and sat in the driveway for 20 minutes before going inside. Marcus found me there. "They asked you," he said. It wasn't a question. "They asked both of us," I said. "Jason said he and Brianna are stretched too thin." "After the house they just bought." "After the house they just bought," I confirmed. Marcus leaned against the car. "I'm not going to tell you what to do," he said. "I love your dad too. I just want you to actually think this through, instead of doing what you've always done because it's what you've always done. Those aren't the same thing, even if they look the same from the outside. What if I think it through and the answer's still yes?" "Then it's a yes you actually chose," Marcus said, "instead of one that chose you before you got a vote." I called my best friend Nadia the next day, sitting on my back porch with tea going cold beside me. "I don't know what to do," I told her. "If I say no, I feel like a monster. My dad almost died, Nadia." "You're not being asked to choose between your dad's health and your comfort," Nadia said. "The hospital's not going to deny him care over an unpaid balance. You're being asked whether you, personally, are going to absorb $34,000 that 3 other adults in that family could theoretically help with, and only one of them has actually been asked to." Jason said he can't. "Jason bought a house 8 months after a $68,000 wedding," Nadia said. "I'm not saying he's lying about being stretched. I'm saying nobody has ever once asked him to stretch further, the way they've asked you your whole life. And I think it's worth noticing that the first time real money got tight, everyone's first instinct was still to look at you. What if something happens because of the unpaid balance? What if it wrecks their credit? That's a real risk, and you get to weigh it honestly, Nadia said. But weigh it against the real risk to you and Marcus, too. What happens to your own savings if you hand over $34,000? It sets us back at least 2 years on the house we've been saving for. Maybe more. So this isn't help your parents or don't, Nadia said. It's delay your own life by 2 years to solve a problem 3 other adults are actually part of, one of whom just bought a house of his own. Say it back to me exactly like that, and tell me it still sounds like the obvious right answer. I sat with that question longer than I wanted to admit. I went to see a financial counselor at the hospital the following week, not to arrange payment on my parents' behalf, but to understand what the actual options were. There's a hardship program most families don't know to ask about, the counselor, a calm woman named Renata, told me, pulling up my father's account. Given his income and the out-of-network circumstances of the surgery, he'd likely qualify for a reduction of up to 40%. Whatever's left can go on an interest-free payment plan, spread over 60 months. What would he need for that? I asked. Proof of income, documentation of the out-of-network gap, and a short hardship letter, Renata said. Honestly, most of it is just knowing which boxes to check. I see families every week who assume the first number on the bill is the final number. It almost never is, if someone's willing to sit down and do the paperwork properly. Why wouldn't my parents already know about this? I asked. Most people don't, Renata said. It's not exactly advertised. You usually need someone in your corner who knows which questions to ask, and most families in crisis don't have the bandwidth to become experts in hospital billing on top of everything else. I left that office with a folder of paperwork, and for the first time in weeks, something that felt like an actual plan. I called the family meeting myself this time, at my own house, which had never happened before in the history of our family. I looked into the hospital's financial assistance programs, I said, once everyone was seated at my kitchen table. There's a hardship program you'd likely qualify for. It could cut the bill by close to 40%. Whatever's left can go on an interest-free payment plan. That's wonderful, honey, my mother said. So you'll help us apply and cover whatever's left. I'll help you apply, I said. I'll come to every appointment. I'll organize every form. I took a breath. But I'm not going to cover what's left. I can't. The kitchen went silent, the same silence that would later fill a hospital waiting room, though none of us knew that yet. Claire, my father said gently, still sounding tired from the surgery. I don't think you understand how serious this is. I understand exactly how serious it is, Dad, I said. I sat in that waiting room for 5 hours. I understand it better than almost anyone. That's not what I'm questioning. Then what are you questioning? My mother asked, an edge creeping into her voice, the specific tone she used when she felt an established order being disturbed. I'm questioning why every single time this family has needed something, I've been the one asked to provide it, I said. I co-signed Jason's food truck loan indirectly by never asking for the $11,000 you spent on it instead of my student loans. I paid for my own wedding so you wouldn't have to stretch for 2. I've been showing up for this family for 29 years. I'm not stopping that. I'm just not going to keep doing it by draining an account Marcus and I built so we wouldn't be vulnerable to exactly this kind of ask. Jason finally spoke. Is this about the wedding? It's about a pattern that includes the wedding, I said, turning to him. I'm genuinely happy you and Brianna had the wedding you wanted. But when Dad's bill came in, nobody asked you to stretch. Everyone accepted we just bought a house without question. The same week I was expected to hand over $34,000 without anyone asking if I could actually afford it. That's not fair, Jason said, heat entering his voice for the first time. I didn't ask to be treated differently growing up. I know, I said. I don't think either of you are villains in this. I looked at my parents. I think you built this pattern one reasonable decision at a time, over almost 30 years, without ever deciding on purpose that I'd always be the one absorbing what the family couldn't afford. But the pattern is real, whether anyone meant to build it or not. So what? You're just going to let Dad's medical debt sit there to make a point? Jason's voice cracked slightly on the word Dad. No, I said. I'm going to help him deal with it more effectively than any of us have dealt with anything financial in this family in almost 30 years. I'm just not going to be the only resource on the table anymore. There's a difference between refusing to help and refusing to be the only one who ever has to. I didn't realize it looked like that from where you were sitting, Jason said, quieter now, some of the heat draining out of him. I mean that. I believe you, I said. That's the part that took me the longest to understand myself. Nobody sat down and decided to do this to me on purpose. That doesn't mean it didn't happen. My mother's eyes filled with tears, and I braced myself for what came next. How dare you bring up money at a time like this? She said, her voice rising. Your father almost died, Claire, and you're sitting here doing math. I'm not doing math instead of caring about Dad, I said, staying calm. I'm trying to actually solve this, more effectively than any of us have solved anything financial in this family in almost 30 years. We need you, my mother said. We have always been able to count on you. That's exactly the problem, I said, quietly. I've spent my whole life being the thing this family could always count on. And I don't think anyone ever asked whether that was sustainable or fair or something I actually chose. My father put his hand on my mother's arm. Susan, he said, let her finish. The follow-up hospital visit happened 2 days later. A routine post-surgical check for my father. The whole family gathered in the waiting room afterward to hear the results, still raw from our conversation at my kitchen table. The doctor confirmed my father was recovering well. Relief rippled through all of us. And then, in the parking lot afterward, my mother turned to me one more time. Please, Claire, she said. I know we've never been perfectly fair, but we need you right now. Won't you reconsider? I looked at her, then at my father, then at Jason, who still wouldn't meet my eyes. No, I said. That single word detonated something in my mother that had been building for weeks. The fear, the exhaustion, the terror of almost losing her husband, all of it looking for somewhere to go. You're selfish, she screamed, right there in the middle of the hospital waiting room, loud enough that every head in the room turned toward us. I felt my face go hot with humiliation. Jason wouldn't look at me. My father stared at the floor. I could have raised my voice back. I could have listed, right there in front of strangers, every single number I'd been carrying quietly for 30 years. Instead, I took a breath, and I said the only thing that was actually true. I love all of you, I said, quietly, my voice not shaking despite everything in me shaking. But this time, I can't. I drove home that day and cried harder than I had in years, not because I regretted what I'd said, but because some part of me had spent 29 years hoping I'd never have to say it. And now that I had, I didn't know what came next. Marcus held me on the couch for a long time without saying anything useful, just being present, which turned out to be exactly what I needed. You did the right thing, he finally said. I know it doesn't feel like it right now. She called me selfish in front of an entire waiting room, I said. After 29 years. I know, Marcus said, and you still showed up to help them file the hardship paperwork the next morning. I don't think selfish people do that. My father called me himself 2 days later, his voice still weak from recovery, careful in a way I wasn't used to hearing from him. I've been thinking about what you said at the table, he told me. About the pattern. Your mother and I talked about it half the night after you left. I wasn't trying to ambush either of you, I said. I've just been carrying it for a long time. I know, he said. I think I knew it before you said it out loud, if I'm honest. I just never let myself look at it directly, because looking at it meant admitting we'd done something we couldn't undo. He paused. I'm proud of you, Claire. I don't think I've said that enough over the years. And I don't think it's the kind of thing you say, only when someone's already succeeded at something. I think it's supposed to be said just for who they are. I'm sorry it took almost dying on an operating table for me to say it properly. I sat with that for a long moment, phone pressed to my ear, feeling something loosen in my chest that had been tight for longer than I could remember. Thank you, Dad, I said. That actually means more to me than any amount of money would have. I did show up the next morning because I'd meant every word I said about helping in every way except the money. I drove my mother to the hospital's billing office. I sat with her while we filled out the hardship application together, my handwriting neat and careful on forms she was too rattled to fill out herself. I'm sorry, she said, halfway through the paperwork, not looking up. For yesterday. I shouldn't have said that in front of everyone. I know you were scared, I said. I'm not holding it against you. I don't think I understood, until right now, filling out these forms with you, how much you've always been the one who understood how to do things like this, she said. I don't know when that happened. I don't know why it was always you. I don't fully know either, I said. I think it just was for a long time, and nobody ever stopped to ask if it should be. Jason called me a week later, his voice different than I'd heard it in years. Careful, rehearsed, like he'd practiced the words before dialing. I've been thinking about what you said, he told me. About the pattern. I talked to Brianna about it. I think I owe you an apology I should have given a long time ago. You don't have to. I do, he said. I've spent my whole life assuming things would work out because they always did, because someone always caught me before I actually fell. I never once asked who was doing the catching or what it cost them. That's on me, Claire, not just Mom and Dad. Thank you for saying that, I said, and I noticed, gently, that I didn't feel the urge to immediately reassure him it was fine. It wasn't entirely fine yet. It was just honest, and honest felt like enough of a start. Brianna and I want to help with Mom and Dad's payments going forward, he said. Not everything, but something real, something consistent. I think that would mean a lot to them, I said. It would mean a lot to me too, honestly. Brianna called me herself a few days later, which surprised me, since we'd always been friendly, but never especially close on our own. I hope it's all right that I'm calling, she said. Jason told me everything that happened. I wanted to say something to you directly, not just secondhand. Of course it's all right. I didn't understand the shape of it until he explained it to me, she said. I knew you helped out sometimes. I didn't realize how long it had been going, or how much you'd carried without anyone acknowledging it. We bought that house 8 months after the wedding, Claire. Telling your parents we were stretched thin wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. We could have found something. We just never thought to look, because looking had never been asked of us before. I appreciate you saying that, I said, more than I expected to. I don't want us to be the kind of family where this happens again, Brianna said. Not just for your sake, for Jason's too. I don't think it's good for him, always being the one who gets caught instead of the one who catches. We talked for almost half an hour, longer than we ever had before, and I hung up feeling something adjacent to closure. A small, real bridge built where there'd only ever been polite distance. The hardship application went through 3 weeks later, reducing the bill by 39%. My parents set up the 60-month payment plan for the remainder, tight, but survivable on my father's disability payments and my mother's part-time hours, especially once I helped them rework their budget and cut a few expenses that had been quietly draining more than they realized. I drove my father to every follow-up appointment for the first 2 months of his recovery. I sat with my mother on the hard afternoons when the weight of everything still felt like too much. and I let her cry without trying to fix it. Just present. The way she'd once been present for me during smaller griefs, back before either of us understood what we'd eventually be asking of each other. Jason and Brianna started contributing a modest, consistent amount to my parents' payments 2 months after that. Not everything, but something real. Something that showed up reliably, instead of only when it was convenient. My mother called me on a Tuesday about 6 weeks after the hardship application went through, her voice tight in a way I recognized from years of smaller crises. "I can't make this month's payment in full," she said. "I'm so ashamed to even be telling you this." The old reflex rose in me immediately, fast and familiar. The urge to say, "Don't worry, I'll cover the difference," before she'd even finished the sentence. I made myself sit with it for a moment instead. "Okay," I said. "Let's look at the budget together and figure out what's actually possible this month." That's different from me just writing a check to make the discomfort go away. We sat at her kitchen table for 2 hours that Saturday, going through every line item, finding $40 here, $60 there, until the gap between what she owed and what she had was small enough to call the hospital and request a one-time adjusted payment, which they granted without hesitation. "I didn't know you could just ask them that," my mother said, hanging up the phone, something like wonder in her voice. "Most people don't," I said. "That's most of what I actually have to offer you, Mom. Not money, just knowing which questions to ask." My parents hosted a Sunday dinner about 4 months after the surgery, the first one since everything had happened, where all 5 of us, Marcus, Jason, Brianna, my parents, and me, sat around the same table without an unspoken debt hanging over the conversation. Jason brought up the topic himself, halfway through dinner, which surprised me. "I've been keeping a spreadsheet," he said, a little sheepishly, sliding his phone across the table toward our father. "Brianna helped me set it up. It tracks what we're contributing each month, so nobody has to wonder or ask. I figured after everything, it was time I learned how to actually do the math instead of just hoping it worked out." My father studied the screen for a long moment, then looked up at Jason with an expression I hadn't seen him wear in years. Something like genuine surprise, and underneath it, real pride. "I don't think I've ever seen you keep a spreadsheet in your life," he said. "Yeah. Well," Jason said, glancing at me. "I had a good teacher, eventually. Just took me 31 years to start paying attention." Everyone laughed, the real kind, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, dinner at my parents' house felt like something built on equal ground, instead of an old, familiar imbalance nobody had ever agreed to out loud. It's been almost a year since that hospital waiting room. My father asked me recently, over coffee at their kitchen table, whether I was still angry. "I'm not angry," I told him. I was, underneath things I didn't have words for a long time. I think I finally understand the difference between loving you and being your only safety net. I needed to stop being the second thing to keep doing the first one honestly. "I don't think your mother and I ever meant to make you that," he said, turning his coffee mug slowly, the same gesture Jason had inherited without either of them noticing. "I think we just kept reaching for whoever was easiest to reach, and it was always you who answered." "I know," I said. "I think that's most of what happened. Nobody meant it. It just happened anyway, for almost 30 years. He nodded and didn't argue the point, which was its own kind of gift I hadn't expected from him. Jason stopped by my house unannounced one Saturday a few weeks later. No particular reason, just to talk, which had never once happened in the entire history of our adult lives. "I wanted to tell you something in person," he said, sitting across from me at my own kitchen table. "I used to think you just liked being the reliable one. Like it was your personality, not a role you got stuck playing. I don't think that anymore. I think I let myself believe that because it was easier than admitting I'd never once asked what it cost you. I think some part of me liked it too for a long time," I admitted. Being needed felt like being loved when I was younger. It took me a long time to figure out those aren't actually the same thing. "How'd you figure it out?" he asked. "A hospital waiting room, mostly," I said. and we both laughed, quietly, the specific laugh of two people who'd survived something together and could finally, carefully find some lightness on the other side of it. "For what it's worth," Jason said, standing to leave. "I don't think I've ever been more proud to call you my sister than the day you said no to all of us. I know that's a strange thing to be proud of. I mean it anyway." I didn't have a response for that right away. I just hugged him, longer than usual, the way he'd hugged me at his own wedding. Except this time it didn't come with anything unsaid underneath it. "Marcus and I are still saving for the house we've wanted for years, the down payment intact, exactly where we left it, because I never handed it over to a bill that wasn't mine to solve alone. My mother came by a few weeks ago, and we sat on my back porch together, quiet for a while, the way we used to be quiet together before either of us understood what silence in our family usually cost. I think I finally understand what you were protecting that day," she said. "It wasn't really the money, was it?" "It was some of the money," I said. "But mostly it was this, the chance to build something that was actually mine, instead of something the family could reach into whenever it needed to." She nodded and reached over and squeezed my hand. The same gesture from the hospital waiting room, except this time it didn't come with a demand attached to it. It just came with her, fully, the way I'd wanted it to for almost 30 years. I don't know if our family will ever be entirely even. Some imbalances, once they've had 30 years to settle into the foundation, don't fully level out just because everyone finally agrees to look at them honestly. But we're standing on more honest ground now than we ever were before that hospital waiting room. And I know that the daughter who stood there, hearing her mother call her selfish in front of a room full of strangers, was the same daughter who finally learned the most important lesson of her entire life. Sometimes the most loving word you can say to the people you love most is no. It didn't end our family. It's the only thing, in the end, that actually saved it.